This is a great book by the author Malcolm Gladwell. And if you're not familiar with Malcolm Gladwell, he's of African descent. I think he was born out of the in the Caribbean, but he was a writer um, for the New Yorker, and he's a renowned author. So one of the things that stood out to me with the Outliers is he uses research, science, and history, and kind of weaves this narrative. And this narrative was about success, how people became successful through timing, circumstance. So one of the things that he profiled in the book was the Jewish population is when they were oppressed in Poland and Russia, Germany, and these other countries, they couldn't own land, but they were allowed to become like craftsmen. So they were allowed to be the seamstresses for clothing, the cobblers for shoes, um, things of that nature that helped, I guess, people in everyday life, but they couldn't own property. So one of the things that he details is in New York, which I'm originally from, back in the early or mid 1900s, when the Jews came into New York, they basically were the peddlers. Women were selling aprons and shoes and different things for like household and daily function, daily life. From that point, once they had their push carts and becoming peddlers and selling things, they opened up little stores. Those stores, fast forward years later, are some of the major supermarket chains and retail chains. Like I know growing up we had A&S, which is Abraham and Strauss. That was a famous retail store. So when you trace back the history of where that started, to think that that came from like a peddler going down cobbled streets up and down New York to major retail chains, you can see the progression. And it's eye opening for us as a culture. Sometimes it's all about modeling other, like in business, you learn about modeling other businesses and how they became successful. And I think that's one of the things that we can do as a black African American culture, is to learn how to use some of that to our benefit, to our advantage. So the other thing that took place is that when that first line of the first generation of Jews that became the peddlers and opened up small stores, that allowed them to generate the income to be able to send that next generation to college. So then those college students became your lawyers, your doctors, your dentists, whatever. The other thing that was a takeaway, there was an area of law that the current established lawyers looked down upon, and that was the mergers and acquisitions. Mergers and acquisitions, if you're not familiar with it, is when corporations buy out other corporations. Amazingly enough, that was frowned upon, according to Malcolm Gladwell, back in those days. They relegated that type of law to the Jews, to be honest with you. So the Jews actually got it, the ones that became lawyers got into this area of law that, if you trace back the growth of the mergers and acquisitions, that's where a lot of wealth came from. These companies that were absorbed became these big companies and started absorbing smaller companies, or finding value in companies where it was kind of hidden. Like they break apart the company because there's assets on the book that aren't public knowledge, but they know they have significant value. If you're not familiar with the T. Boone Pickens era, and actually another book that I have on my shelf, which is Why Should White Guys Have All of the Fun, which is Reginald Lewis, who subsequently died, but he was one of the first billionaires. But he became interested based on that era of mergers and acquisitions when he was a lawyer. So this is an important book, The Outliers, and I'll do a quick review on Reginald Lewis's book as well. But if you haven't read this one, read it. It's a good read.